Good afternoon and welcome everybody to this Rare Impact launch event from possible to accessible. Today we're going to launch the Rare Impact report on challenges and solutions for improving patient access to advanced therapies, medicinal products at the European level. We have a packed agenda with lots of great speakers. But before we start, I would like to remind, if we don't have heard all of these housekeeping rules before in these troubled times, to use your real name when registering, to mute yourself, particularly for the speakers, when not speaking, particularly for the audience. We will have about 190 people registered today. Use your chat box for any question. I'm Simone Boselli, Public Affairs Director at Eurordis, and I will be your moderator for today. And seeing now that we have already quite about 100 people already registered and listening to the webinar, I would like to introduce, or it doesn't need any introduction, our Chief Executive Officer, Jan Lecan, will give us a brief introduction and his point of view on rare impact, why we've done it, and what does it mean for the rare disease patient community. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simone, and welcome to all participants online for this event. The Rare Impact was founded in response to the patient access challenges to the first wave of advanced therapies, mostly gene and cell therapies. Next, please. In Europe, there is about 30 million Europeans, people living with rare disease, and 72% of them have a disease of genetic origin. Among them, 70% appears in childhood. Indeed, we had, and we still have, huge hopes that scientific advances are now translating into transformative and potentially curative treatments. And new scientific platforms of drug developers are multipotent, enabling to scale up these advanced therapies to different rare diseases pretty quickly. However, to date, patients' access to these advanced therapies is close to a disaster. The access has been hampered both by practical and technical challenges. Out of 13 products approved in Europe, if we are correct, 5 have been withdrawn from market for different reasons. The sustainability was not there, the data were not there, the capacity was not there, but we don't have anything comparable, right, for the other type of medicines. There are 5 products which are available in less than 3 member states in Europe, which immediately raise the questions about access cross-border for the patients from other countries. And 3 products only are available in more than 3 European countries, which still doesn't make 27. So we still have the issue of cross-border access, which will come in. And for these life-saving treatments, they can only save lives if they are accessible to patients. So accessible is as essential as the innovation coming in these gene and cell therapies. So there's the science, but there is also the innovation on the system to make the product accessible. So the ultimate ambition of Rare Impact Initiative is to optimize the patient access to effective gene and cells therapies. Next. Rare Impact is indeed a consortium. It was initiated by Eurordis, and we turned to Dolan to partner with us in this work for their knowledge on value determination, on pricing and reimbursement, and on market access. And also because we had experience of working together before in other multi-stakeholder group for the determination of value of orphan drugs. And we knew that not only they have the knowledge, but they have the know-how to engage with different multi-stakeholders in a respectful way. Together, we have invited companies to join. We targeted, obviously, the companies who have a product on the market in Europe or in the US, or who have a portfolio with some advanced developments. We were privileged to be joined by 18 companies, you see the names here, plus two other non-profit organizations which are bringing another business model to development of medicines and another perspective, and that's Teleton Italia, clearly a pioneering in this area when we think of Strambilis and Adaskid and other products ongoing, but also Geneton and FM Teleton, who have been pioneering from the start, even with the gene map, and now with the development of many medicines in this area, often in partnership with companies. We also invited the trade associations, FPA, UCOP, and the Alliance of Regenerative Medicines to join, so that the work done during these 2 years would, at the end, be a public good available to all, and where we would have a common understanding of the issues and of the solutions, even though we will advocate in our respective remits. During these 2 years, we were able to establish a dialogue driven by the questions raised by us as patient representative after working with our members to identify these key questions on patient access issues, but working with the companies from the real life situations. And that was the point, to be real about the concrete issues. And I really would like to thank all the participants of the consortium for having played the game of sharing knowledge, experience, expertise, and time. Together, we have co-created solutions with ideation initially, and then, as much as possible, a formulation of a pragmatic approach. The views expressed in the reports are the ones of the consortium altogether, but they don't necessarily reflect the view of Eurodis per se, or of Dolan per se, or of each of the companies or pharma associations. On our agenda, next slide, today we will start with an introduction of the patient perspective by Avril Daly, Chief Executive Officer of Retina International and also Vice President of Eurodis. Then a presentation of the main results and recommendations on rare impact presented by Carolina Hanslick, who has been the manager of that project during the 2 years, working with Simone Boselli, together with Adam Hutchings at Dolan, who have been leading that piece of work in his company. Then we'll have the presentation of the stakeholders' views from the different perspectives of the patient groups, of the researchers, of the patients themselves, or representative of the patients' organizations, and from the industry. Then after we will turn to the institutions somehow with the European HTA network, European Commission, European Medicine Agency, and European Parliament. I would like to thank in advance each speaker for making the time to join us for this discussion and sharing their perspective. Now, with that, I'm handing over back to Simone.
Thanks a lot, Jan. Thank you very much. And from a personal note, it's great to see this project really come to light after over 2 years of work and over another half a year of preparation before that. But before handing over to our Avril, I would like to see if every one of you is still with us. I see we have about 125 people today, and Davo, please put up our first poll of the day. And we just really want to understand who is with us today from the representation from patient industry, the academic world, clinician, payers, or HTA body, policymakers in general, or regulatory bodies. So just a few seconds so we can see the poll is open. Please submit. Here we go. Thank you very much for your time. Double, can we see some of the results already? Okie dokie, I can see you. Overwhelming industry representation so far, or majority of them. We still have some time to change view, but still we have quite a good representation from other areas. Now, I will turn to Avril Daly, who has been introduced already a little bit by Jan. Is Vice President of Eurordis, as well as CEO of Retina International, and a number of other positions. But primarily, she has been advocating for patients living with inherited retinal disorders for quite a long time. And I would like to turn to Avril to give us the views from the patients on the arrival of these therapies to the markets, to see what the challenges that they see on the ground, and what, in your view, are the possible solutions. Avril, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simona, for inviting me to speak with you today. As you said, my name is Avril Daly. I'm the CEO of Retina International, and I work very closely with Eurordis as its Vice President. I'm also a person living with the rare condition retinitis pigmentosa, which is an inherited retinal degeneration. And I'm here really today to talk to you about, first of all, to welcome this report, which is very important for us and our community and really gets the discussion going, but also just to talk to you about our own experience in Retina International and the work that we've done in relation to data generation and why it is so important for this particular subject. So the purpose of the Rare Impact Study is to provide a starting point for multi-stakeholder discussion, as we've already discussed and as Jan has already mentioned, at an EU level and also really at a national level. It's going to be very important, obviously, in discussions on the future of the EU pharmaceutical strategy and the evaluation of the orphan medicinal product regulation as we move forward. We know that there are common challenges across Europe that require country-level policy change, and that challenges also exist at European level that will need to be addressed through collaborations and guidance from European institutions. Collaborations of stakeholders at EU and national level must be inclusive of regulators, payers, registry holders, clinicians, patient groups, and industry, in order to really support the development and utilization of real-world data sets to serve multiple purposes, including pharmacovigilance, reimbursement, and of course, clinical research. So, as I said, I represent a global patient organization called Retina International, run by patients for patients. And we are working with people with rare eye diseases and also, and in particular, inherited retinal degenerations, which are incredibly complex conditions. We know that there are about 300 different IRDs that have been described to date. So that's 300 different gene types. So a very complex area. So our community has recognized the need to understand the prevalence and socioeconomic impact of these diseases on our population in order to address the significant barriers. In our case, these would be barriers particular to investment in research, in the provision of support services, the lack of investment in infrastructures, and in particular here, I want to highlight the issue of registers, and also barriers to access for innovative therapies, innovative care, and technologies that are emerging. As a community, we fundamentally believed that the anecdotal evidence of the lived experience had to be presented through a robust study that would highlight the significant need of the populations we represent, and in particular to demonstrate, for example, that the method of assessing diseases in general does not fit with the need of the IRD community, who are not as dependent on hospital services as, say, for example, they would be with something like social services and psychological supports. We wanted to highlight the intangible or invisible costs to the individuals affected and to their families, and also, and critically, to demonstrate the huge impact on well-being of the individual and families affected by IRDs and how that impacts all of their lives. As with many communities in the ORD space, we understand that there are going to be gaps. Indeed, it is recognized that the prevalence and impact of rare disease at a national, regional, and global level is largely undocumented, And in fact, it's only very recently that we're having some really good studies that are starting to really highlight the prevalence of these conditions to allow us to better understand them. So that's quite a recent thing. So you can imagine how difficult it is when you're looking at a specific rare disease, when you take all of the rare disease together and it's complicated. Looking at very rare and ultra rare conditions could be very daunting and has been daunting to the population. It might seem even unrealistic a task with the issue of data gaps is considered. However, gaps show a need, and without understanding those gaps and highlighting those gaps, we won't be addressing that need. And so in this case, we can say maybe gaps are good, data gaps are good, they're important. So to address this data vacuum in Retina International, we established a multi-stakeholder consortium called IRD Counts, led by patient organizations to support the cost of illness study of 10 IRDs in 2019. So the study consisted of a literature review and a survey co-created by patients themselves, including those affected, but also their parents, to ask the questions that had not really been asked before. The information that was shared ultimately by our patient community has laid bare the really stark reality and the impact of living with IRDs brings. The real world data we have extracted from this study provides an irrefutable platform for advocates in this field. And it also opens the door to increased awareness and action around creating meaningful supports and therapies for those living with inherited retinal degenerations. So we undertook 4 studies under the IRD Counts banner, a pilot study in the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, as well as the Republic of Ireland, because they also included 5 separate areas. You have England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then you have the Republic of Ireland. So it gave a really good model. We then undertook a study this year in 2020 in the United States and Canada, and what it did, I should say, was it reaffirmed the studies that took place in the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. The analysis was based on targeted literature review and primary data survey collection. So just to repeat that. So I just want to explain to you some of the findings that we have had, particularly from the United States, because it's their most recent study. So what we discovered in the United States, that the socioeconomic burden of IRDs was up to $31.7 billion. 2/3 of these costs were associated with well-being costs. So that was up to $20 billion US. That was 63% of the total. Productivity costs, so that would be relating to employment, were the second highest burden in both the United States and Canada. In the United States, that was $4.056 billion in costs. The third highest cost was attributed to informal care. So that was 8% of the total cost in the United States. And this accounts for assistance with domestic tasks such as cooking, cleaning, organizing, administering medication, shopping, transport, and monitoring well-being. So of interest, and what we particularly observed, was a consistency in the breakdown of cost type. Well-being costs were the greatest cost type in all 4 studies in the United Kingdom, Republic of Ireland, Canada, and the United States. And this was followed consistently in all 4 countries by productivity losses. So, however, what was of great concern is that all 4 studies also prove that the process of reimbursement of therapies for inherited retinal degenerations are completely inappropriate. All 4 studies show that the health system costs, which reimbursement processes reflect on, are extremely low and represent a mere 4.5% of total costs in the Republic of Ireland, 4.8% of total costs in the UK, 7.2% of total costs in the United States of America, and 2.3% of total costs in Canada. So therefore, there is clearly, they clearly do not reflect the true cost of living with an IRD. And we had to do this study in order to find this out. It was very, very important. We also asked patients we engage with in each study, I suppose it's an important thing to say, we ask our patients to engage in these studies, and they're willing and enthusiastic participants in the generation of data. And they generally are and want to support initiatives that we have in order to highlight the reality of the lived experience and consider what we need to do to make positive change. But we as a community, those of us asking patients, especially patient organizations, we need to consider very importantly that whole aspect of this whole piece of work, really, because we as patient organizations empower patients not to be identified by their condition, rather they're somebody who's living with their condition. We ask for them to look for solutions and support them in doing so. We support efforts to live an independent life and to strive for ways to participate in the society as equals. What these studies do is they ask patients to delve deep within them and ask questions that can often be uncomfortable and challenging. And so with this in mind, it is very, very important for us to remember that we have to provide some supports to patients when we're asking those questions. We have to consider what these questions mean to the patient. And while it's very important, we know that all of these studies go through ethical boards, we have to include the patient in the creation of the questions, how to frame the question, how to phrase the question, so that we are being careful and responsible in how we get our results. And that might seem something strange to say, but we in Retina International, we feel that is very important. So we did provide access to support for those that we engaged with in this study. And we think that's an important model that should be followed. So really getting back to today, that's an example of one organization that's had to do a considerable amount of work as a global organization to highlight need. There's an awful lot more work to do. It's really great to see this particular study being highlighted today, the Rare Impact Study. What resonated with me, I think, and is great to see highlighted, is the need for collaboration. I think it flows through the entire document. It's incredibly important that all stakeholders in this space work together, that we really, try to deal with what have been complex issues. I remember starting, working in this space in 2000, looking at the orphan drug regulation as it was then. It was complex then, it's complex now. Things have moved on. We are hopeful for the future. We're seeing huge advantage as patients, as parents. We're seeing hope. We're seeing it really, really reflected in the emergence of new technologies. But if we don't get access, that's devastating to us, not only in the way we live our lives, but, in general to society. For all of the innovators who have put their, lives work into these therapies and potential for our future, we have to find the ways forward. And we can do that by talking to each other, by engaging with each other, as is set out in this document. It's very important, and it may seem novel, but it isn't. We've been doing this for a long time, but it's important for us now to capture the data, use it appropriately, and make the positive changes we need for the future. So thank you for listening to our experience and the work that we've done. And thank you very much to Eurordis, to all of the supporters, and to Dolan for introducing and launching this document. It was great to read it. And as I said, a lot of work done and an awful lot more work to do. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you, Simona.
Avril, thank you very much for your words and your numbers. We have had similar sessions at the ECRD in 2020, where you were presenting the study up and excluding the US and Canada, but it's great to see that the numbers that you had shown then are confirmed with further studies. And this highlights the key questions that we are addressing in the reports, including needs for registry, as you mentioned, etc., etc. But without further ado, we would like to dig into the report, and I will introduce my wonderful colleague Carolina Hanslik, policy officer in Eurordis, and she joined expressly from the European Commission to help us in the stewardship of this project. I will also add that Carolina also is a person living with a rare disease in a family, as well as Adam Hutchins, Managing Director at Donald, a friend of the rare disease community, as I would say, who has provided us the technical expertise in dealing with this report. Carolina and Adam will present the findings of the report, how we got there, and what we need to do next. Carolina, the floor is yours.
Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you, Simone, for this nice introduction. Thank you, Avril, for all your important messages. In my joint presentation, I would like to share with you the key areas of work where impact was focused on. I would like to take the opportunity to thank all the consortium for the great work, all the partners, and a big thank especially to Adam and his extended team at Dolon for the great support, knowledge, professionalism, and good spirit during these 2 years of work. If I can have the next slide, please. Yes. So yes, I would just say a few words about the history, although it was already said by Jan. We started the whole journey in 2018 at the European Conference on Rare Diseases in 2018 in Vienna. Since then, we continued to work, and we had 7 working group meetings. We met in Brussels 7 times physically. We had these meetings in a nice university foundation in Brussels, as you can see. Since then, we had to continue and finish online this event. I regret that we cannot meet in this one nice building, but such is life. So the group started to work on and reflect on the best ways to improve access to cell and gene therapies. If I can have the next slide, please. Yes, let me explain also why we started the whole work, the whole journey. So at the time when the Rare Impact was launched, we knew about the 4 cell and gene therapies that were approved and they were potentially accessible to patients. During our work, few and even 5 new advanced therapies got approved by European Medicine Agency. And soon we know that soon we will have new therapies entering the market, but not easily accessible by patients. So there is certainly a big problem that there are many barriers to true access to those therapies. So it's why we define the objectives with the Rare Impact Consortium. So the first objective was really to define the challenges to potential access to advanced therapies. Then we propose some actionable solutions to address these challenges. We also wanted to prepare the stakeholders to these challenges and to propose solutions for better access to gene and cell therapies, not only at national level, but also at the European Union level. So the overarching vision of this initiative is to ensure patients obtain quick access to the gene and cell therapy in Europe, and that we create a sustainable model for manufacturers and payers and also other stakeholders, the key stakeholders at the European Union level. If I can have the next slide, yes. So just few words, what we have done and how we have done our work. First of all, we categorized all the challenges in solutions into 4 groups. These 4 groups are assessment, affordability, availability, and accessibility. And then we started to work in 3 phases. The first phase was about the primary and secondary research to identify the challenges. Then on this, we discussed those challenges with the external stakeholders, patients, organizations, manufacturers, payers, regulatory bodies, HTA representatives. Then we started the second stage about the solution ideation. Here we summarize the relevant conceptual solutions from literature, and we developed European and country level specific solutions. And then we entered the third stage, which is the solution implementation. And today we are exactly at the end of this phase 3, where we try to engage with different stakeholders at national and European level to discuss those solutions. So today we are really finishing the stage 3 of Rare Impact initiative. If I can have the next slide, please. Yes. So during the work, we identify 10 countries on which we have been working. So those 10 countries are Austria, Czechia, Denmark, England, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and Sweden. I invite you to have a look at the Rare Impact website to check these national reports that were published earlier this year on the occasion of the European Conference on Rare Diseases. So these reports are online. And on the basis of these reports, and with the support of our national alliances, we had several meetings in the countries to discuss these challenges and to discuss also the solutions to improve access to these therapies. We had the meetings in Germany and in Italy. We know that many other stakeholders, national organizations, and European Federation of Diseases are using those reports to talk to their ministries of health, to their national authorities, to talk to them about the authorization of the therapies on their markets. So I really invite you to look at these reports, to read them, and to send us some comments, and especially to use them in the discussions with the national authorities. I finish here now the short presentation. I give the floor to Adam. So Adam will present the European level recommendations coming out from this report.
Thank you, Carolina. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm briefly going to summarize the high-level challenges and proposed solutions across 4 buckets. Those are assessment, affordability, availability, and accessibility. So starting with assessment, perhaps the most consistent challenge we observe across countries was that the evidence that is available for cell and gene therapies at the time of launch often diverges from what national HTA agencies normally require. European regulators have been relatively quick to adjust their methods to reflect the nature of ATMPs in rare diseases. ATMPs are much more likely to have been approved through conditional authorization or on phase 2 data. They're more likely to have received prime designation. When we look at national HTA agencies, they've started to grapple with these evidential issues more recently, and we're seeing some promising developments where local HTA agencies have demonstrated flexibility in their traditional methodologies, but there is still a gap between the regulators and the HTA bodies in how they are assessing evidence and the methods they're using for ATMPs. So the recommendation here is that we need more collaboration and European level guidance to align methodologies between HTA agencies and regulators for ATMPs. And in particular, we need guidance on things such as the acceptability of surrogate endpoints, how we extrapolate data and how we interpret data on durability of efficacy and safety, and the acceptability of cohorts for synthetic controls when there's only single arm data. The second issue is the critical importance of post-approval evidence generation for these products, given the long-term benefits of treatment. It makes a great deal of sense for the collection of real-world data to be coordinated at the European level so that you can pool the data, you can make the most use of the amount of data that's available, which may not be so great in small populations. However, we see that many HTA agencies prefer local registries, specific data collection in their own countries, and this can make pooling data across countries difficult, if not impossible. So the recommendation on this topic is to coordinate registries and data collection between regulators and payers at the European level. And to this end, the Rare Impact Consortium has initiated a specific work program to explore a potential framework on disease registries and ATMPs that could be implemented at the EU level in a more coherent and collaborative way. And this work commences as of January. If we can go to the second theme, so affordability. The nature of ATMPs with upfront payments and often long-term benefits poses a particular challenge in regards to the affordability and pricing of these medicines. Innovative contracting agreements have been proposed as the solution for this challenge, and we've seen them implemented successfully already in a number of situations. However, the uptake of such schemes across Europe have been constrained by practical and sometimes philosophical objections from HTA agencies and payers. One example of a practical constraint is around the use of annuity payments, where payers can potentially spread the cost over a series of years rather than paying all upfront. And these have been rejected in some countries due to the belief that they contravene European accountancy rules. So the recommendation here is that whilst pricing reimbursement responsibility sits with member states, there is a lot of commonality on this issue across countries, and there's an opportunity for greater coordination and collaboration between countries to identify common standards for approaches to implementing innovative contracting agreements and annuity payments. There is also a need to address the more fundamental concern about the price and affordability of ATMPs. The individual price points of these therapies and the perception of total budget impact in future are a major cause of concern for many stakeholders. And if these technologies are going to be sustainable, we have to be able to have an informed and transparent debate about the economics of ATMPs. This is the second area of focus for the Rare Impact Group in 2021. We have a work stream to try and better engage with stakeholders on the nature of the innovation model for ATMPs, the role that pricing plays in incentivizing innovation, and the sustainability of expenditure on ATMPs in rare diseases. If we can go to the next slide, please. The third bucket is availability. And here, the major challenges that we see at the European level relate to two issues. The first is cross-border healthcare. ATMPs may only be available in a single centre or a couple of centres across Europe due to the need to concentrate expertise. Patients therefore have to be able to travel across borders to access treatment. There are two main legislative pathways that enable that to happen, the E112 and the S2 pathway. Of those two, the S2 is the most important for ATMPs, and yet it wasn't designed for ATMPs. It's not geared up to routine cross-country provision of healthcare. There are inconsistencies in how it's being used between countries, and currently it's not consistently facilitating patient access to ATMPs that are not available in the home market. We therefore need guidance at the European level on how legislative instruments should be applied for ATMPs. We need more consistency between countries in how they're using these mechanisms. Each member state currently has a coordinator, and there needs to be more collaboration and education between coordinators on ATMPs. Currently, that role of coordination is too often being left up to the individual companies, and that's not sustainable for a larger volume of ATMPs and a larger volume of patients who need to cross borders to access them. The second challenge around availability relates to the hospital exemption legislation. This is an allowance within ATMP regulation for hospitals to create their own cell or gene therapies where necessary on a non-routine basis. The issue is that legislation is somewhat vague, and this is happening routinely in some circumstances where treatments are available, which raises some concerns relating to safety. It also undermines the incentive to invest in research to demonstrate the efficacy of ATMPs. The recommendation here is not around reopening the regulation, but rather clarification and guidance from the Commission on the circumstances under which the use of hospital exemption should be considered reasonable. If we can go to the final slide, please. The final bucket is accessibility. And the key challenge here relates to delays to patient access due to the need for centre certification. Now, ATMPs are provided in very specialist centres. They require technical expertise, specific resources, such as ICU capacity. Regulators mandate certification for CAR-Ts, for example. We're also now seeing some countries putting in place their own requirements, such as in France. There's potential for this to lead to delays. Certification currently takes between 3 and 6 months. It could take longer if there's additional certification requirements at the country level in conditions where patients have life expectancy in the order of months. This is potentially a major problem. The solution that's being proposed in our paper is to educate around the existing system in place for treatment centre qualification and to encourage stakeholder dialogue to explore options to reduce administrative burden and ensure consistency across member states. And this is the third work stream that the Rare Impact Consortium are going to focus on in 2021. The idea is to investigate how this could work in practice and how we can minimize time barriers due to certification. So there's more detail on each of these factors and on all of these recommendations in the report. That is available on the Rare Impact Consortium website, which is www.rarimpact.eu. We would encourage those of you who are participating in today's webinar to access the report and to leverage the report alongside the 10 country-specific reports to engage with external stakeholders with the ambition of advancing, engaging, and implementing the recommendations. I greatly welcome the thoughts and feedbacks from the panelists today, and if anyone else wishes to give feedback, they can do so on the website. Simone.
Thank you so much, Caroline and Adam. I hope, and it certainly conveys the extent and amount of work that has been put in place in the past 2 years to have a detailed analysis of the individual country challenges, but also lifting them up to see what's the European challenges are and how they can be resolved in the European context. It is now a very good time, as tomorrow the European Commission is planning to release its pharmaceutical strategy. And we understand there is quite a place for gene and cell therapies in this forthcoming policy framework. But now we'll turn to the initiation of this dialogue. And I will turn to our Professor Hans-Dieter Volk from the Charité Universität Medicine of Berlin, where he's the head of the Institute of Medical Immunology, but also a great supporter of the rare disease communities, as well as very informed in ATMPs, has been leading the large research initiative candidate Restore. Professor Volk, what do you make of these challenges and the proposed solution at European level from your own perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Do you hear me? Yes, no? Okay, yeah, welcome and good afternoon. Yeah, thanks for the invitation to give a short statement on the proposal or on the document you sent to me. First of all, my general impression is very positive. I think this is a very important document, well structured, clear analysis, clear proposed solutions. Therefore, I think I agree with most of the points, or almost all. Maybe some special comments from my side, as a scientist or as a translational scientist. By background, I'm clinical immunologist and relatively active in the field of development of cell and gene therapy, particularly cell-based gene therapy. I think the first minor points to the proposed solutions, for example, availability and accessibility, maybe to the last first. I think I completely agree that there is a need for to treat patients in specialized centers which have variable certification documents and requirements. I completely agree. I also agree with a proposed solution, but I think it's not wide enough. I think if you give it so soft, I think we will not come fast enough forward. I recommend to make really clear structures which interlink the different hubs or different excellence centers, which we propose also in our proposal to European Commission by the Restore initiative. We think it's very important that this is a more formal really network which have a supportive structure, which have regular meetings and really bring out joint documents. A good step forward in this direction as an example is, for example, the recent initiative of the University Hospital Alliance in Europe, which formed the UCAT, which focus on T-cell therapy on to tumor, not on a rare disease in general, to really make an interlink between the different centers and to bring, to exchange SOPs, to exchange even patient study protocols and so on and so on. I think that is a very important point that we define structures which are relatively precise. For example, modified stem cell therapy, gene-modified stem cell therapy, or in vivo gene therapy with viral vectors like AAV or non-viral approaches with CRISPR-Cas, that we form really dedicated networks which communicate at a high level and develop recommendations for local, as a regional, national, but also international organizations, both at the regulatory side as well as on the reimbursement side. I think that is much more powerful than a very imprecise statement. I think I would do it more precise. A second minor point is to the AV2, to the hospital exemption. I would say the hospital exemption have importance, but it cannot be block the development of confirmed or approved drugs in this field. And therefore, I think we should recommend not to circumvent this or to exclude this completely. I think it's a good tool for the further start and to come very fast to the patient. But in the moment that we have multi-center approved proposals, it should be immediately stopped. That is not in each case the case. That means you can continue. If you have a hospital exemption, you can continue even if a commercial or a multi-center product is on the market. And that, I think, is counterproductive. It can be only the bridge. It cannot be the solution. It can be only the bridge for fast access. But if the access is possible, then in a more precise way, then it should be stopped. And of course, it must absolutely, I completely agree, it must, even as bridging, it must fulfill the criteria of follow-up of patients to have also pharmacovigilance. So that's two minor points. A third aspect, which I'm completely missing, is which is, I think, important for affordability, availability, is the investment in research. I'm missing it in the document completely. I think we need research in this field and interlinked research, which really bring together the expertise here in Europe to prevent reinvention of the wheel everywhere and to bring technology forward. Why we need it? We think first we need it, for example, in the field of manufacturing, that we have a lot of very, very powerful technology enabling industry here in Europe, which is working more to US and others because we have not enough opportunities here. And therefore, I think in particular for the cell-based gene therapy, technology improvement is very, very important point. And therefore, we need collaboration here and collaborative research in this field to bring forward technology which increase the capacity and therefore also the accessibility for patients. We can improve the costs benefit ratio because by more automated solutions that you can decrease the costs. And therefore, I think I will not go into the details because of time, but I think it's very important that we invest here in interaction between the players. And here the hub structure of this, I mentioned before, the Center of Excellence is very, very important because it can interlink enabling industry, pharma, biotech industry, patient interest and academic centers. That I think is a very important aspect. Another important aspect in the research is, of course, to look for alternatives for the virus derived gene intervention, both in vivo as well as in cell culture, as in cell products. Therefore, I think particularly the CRISPR-Cas or similar technologies are very important here. Here is Europe strong, but not strong enough in exploitation, as usual. We have nice ideas, but the other makes the money. That means I think it's very important here to in a similar way, to bring together the research to focus and to form consortia which work together. Also, collaboration is more important than competition. I know with all the private aspects and it's sometimes not easy, but I think it's the only way we have to invest our money in a good way and to bring it to the patient as soon as possible. So that maybe my point of view to the document. I like it, but some points. Thanks.
No, thank you for your intervention very much. Luckily enough, the Commission is presenting also an action plan on intellectual protection tomorrow, and intellectual property. So perhaps that's some of your questions will be answered. But now I would like to turn to our good old friend Mariette Drissens from VSOP, our Dutch Rare Disease Patient Alliance. Mariette is a very informed patient, a very expert patient, having participated for no less than 6 years as a full member or alternate member in the activities of the European Medicine Agency in the CAT. Mariette, what are your views on the report?
Simone, thank you. I hope you can hear me. Yes.
Very well.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity to speak. I think for these products, the ATMPs, patients have tremendous interest and expectations. So it's very important. There's a lot of hope with patients for these curative treatments. So I welcome this report and I think it's very important that we indeed work together, form partnerships to really implement these therapies in the clinic and that patients have access. So you asked me to comment on a couple of the topics, and I chose 3. So, and I think the first topic I would like to speak about is the role of patient registries and patient organizations. As we discussed, of course, the EMA and some HTA agencies probably will implement these registries as a requirement for long-term follow-up of patients. I think this is very important since it's still early days, I think, for these novel products, and we need to collect evidence on durability, on side effects, adverse events of special interests, as the EMA is calling that. And I think it's a chance as well to collect meaningful real-world data on the burden of disease, burden of participation in trials, and of course the value of these treatments for patients. And I think it will these kind of collaboration where we have I see also a role for patient organizations in the governance of these registry. And I think the EMA has done a wonderful work with the EMA registry initiative. And I think also on the last month, we had the workshop on the guideline for registry-based studies, where I spoke as well. The registry will have novel ways of communication with the participants of the registry. and to collaborate and, for instance, to do telemonitoring. So it's a real chance, I think. And I'm glad to hear that there will be a work stream in the Rare Impact project on the registries. And what I see now is a quite recent strategic partnership for the Go CAR-T. I saw it recently published on LinkedIn this weekend by the European Bone Marrow Transplant Registry and the European Hematology Association. It's called Go CAR-T. I think this is obviously directed against collaboration for the development of CAR-Ts and the implementation of the CAR-T cells in the clinic for hematological cancers. So I hope this will be an example for other parties to work together and form similar strategic partnerships. For instance, I think we need that for the rare diseases as well, for instance, for the lentiviral gene therapy, which is being combined with hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, and possibly also for the AAV factor, these technology that is successful now. And I think for the rare diseases, we are all looking at the European reference networks and hope that they can play a role in this as hubs and centers of expertise where patients with these gene therapies and cell therapies are being treated. And for the registries, we intend to collaborate, of course, with the European platform on rare disease registration. So that was the point on registries. I want to share a couple of words, obviously, on affordability, since this is a requirement, I think, to have access for patients. I think, I'm also involved in the EURORDIS project, the Rare 2030, this foresight study. And there it was clear that many patients and patient organizations observe or see these high prices of these therapies as a threat, and a threat to the solidarity of the health insurance systems in our countries. So I think this is the sustainability for the healthcare system is really a topic we need to work on. And for the short-term solutions, I think of joint negotiations and procurements with initiatives like the Beneluxa. I'm from the Netherlands, so I follow this Beneluxa initiative where the Netherlands works together with Belgium, Luxembourg, Austria, and Ireland. On the other hand, what I think is an opportunity, and Professor Volk, he mentioned this as well. Of course, we need research, academic pharma. This will help us to, for instance, improve production so that we have cheaper production, maybe platform technologies, they will be developed. So there will be some solutions from the science indeed. I think this is important. And we need collaboration with academic institutions as well, since for many rare diseases, I think there is not a viable commercial business model. So we need this collaboration with the academia to fulfill the promise of these therapies for patients and also for the ultra rare diseases. So this is something indeed that's not really elaborated in this report. So we need to work on that. And the last couple of words on availability. I think it would be very good to have like a European coordination where to see where these therapies are available in the certified centers. And for patients, I think it's important that there will be, of course, a route when there's no treatment center in their country, that they can get treatment abroad, maybe via the S2 route, cross-border healthcare, or even bilateral agreements between countries. So let's see. And I hope that the national contact points that are there for the cross-border healthcare, maybe they can play a role in this process. So those were my remarks on your
Mariette.
report.
I'll
Thank
let you
you.
go away with a few more minutes because you're a patient, and that's it. There we do. But we move on to another patient representative, Hervé Nabaret, Dr. Hervé Nabaret, who has been several years also before joining IFM Teleton as a Deputy Public Affairs Director as part of the HIS. Hervé, nice to see you here. So what do you think about this recommendation? Which one do you find are the most important, and which one do you find that are perhaps less important? Thank you, Hervé.
Thank you for inviting me as a representative of AFM Teleton, which is a patient group dedicated to neuromuscular diseases in France and more generally rare diseases. These collaborative works and open discussions are useful. We approve some elements of the rare impact report, especially those dealing with assessment and necessary collaborations in that field. But I must say that we have some problems with others, especially those concerning affordability and payments at the level of countries. So concerning the first topic, assessment, the report puts the stress on collaboration between EMA and HTA bodies to produce guidance on a TMP assessment, especially to address remaining clinical uncertainties. So this is good. Coordination on data collection seems indeed necessary. And aside from this level, there is also probably a more infrastructure level means of traceability and tracking for products, for patient follow-up, means to capture real-world evidence. And we favor improvements in registries policies because as a patient group, we fund registries. So the better the coordination between registries policies, the better the use of public donations we invest in these registries. But in order to avoid an oversimplistic view concerning the collaboration between the European and the national level, I would add two remarks. It can sometimes be difficult for an HTA body to strictly follow market authorization in their coverage decisions. I am thinking about the recent market authorization for Zolgensma in spinal muscular atrophy. This market authorization doesn't give a clear, very clear boundaries concerning the group of babies who should receive the gene therapy. A second remark: if I am referring to recently assessed ATMPs, most of them had real clinical endpoints. The endpoint nature was not the assessment main issue, I think. So I would say that real clinical endpoints can often be useful to facilitate market authorization and HTA steps. A few words about the second topic, the affordability issue. In the report, the reasoning is the following. High prices are necessary to allow further development by companies. Countries must be able to adopt new funding mechanisms, such as multi-year payments, to be able to pay for expensive drugs. And manufacturers will have to educate stakeholders on the complexity of the ATMP business model and the role of rewards. However, from our point of view, this reasoning doesn't take into account the following points. First, there is probably a question of dynamics of expenses, because year after year, there will be more and more ATMPs. If you adopt multi-year payments, you can probably increase the rise of expenses, because a given year, you have to pay for both the current administrations of new drugs and also for the previous one. So it can be a problem, in fact. And secondly, even if it was possible to push the payment in that direction, we should question the value and the price we will have to pay. Let's consider recent trends in health economics. Some economists suggested that new analysis to share the value between innovators and payers concerning curative therapies. They also proposed to take into account the rate of return in pricing. The result is a price that can be higher or smaller than the value-based price, depending on the situations. And this analysis can help to reduce excessive prices. And on the opposite, it can help to give some drugs a good price in the field, for example, of ultra-rare diseases. And beyond technical elements, as a patient group, we think that transparency, rate of return, cost of production must be taken into account when thinking about value and price. Speaking only about means of payment is not sufficient, because excessive prices can threaten the access to drug. And to conclude, I would say that ATMPs are characterized by a high level of uncertainty, high manufacturing costs, and high claimed prices. We should push forward the traditional reflections about assessment and affordability, and these issues should be seen as a shared responsibility on the government and payer side, but also on the manufacturer's side.
Okay. Thank you, Hervé, for putting the fingers on the key critical aspects of the accessibility of these therapies. And luckily, we have also Tresha Bold that next to you that can reply directly on some of these points. Tresha, nice to have you here from Bluebird Bio. Thanks again for taking the opportunity to come here. I didn't notice that we had two Dutch representatives yet. Tresha, what are your views on the recommendation in the report? And I will pretty please ask you to be short and punchy.
Will do. Just as a brief introduction, so my name is Tresha Bolt. I'm responsible for public affairs for Bluebird Bio. Bluebird Bio is a company dedicated entirely to gene therapies, and we're at the moment in the process of launching and getting to patients our first gene therapy, whilst preparing for our second gene therapy for an ultra-rare disease. So I actually want to spend a little bit of time on cross-border healthcare in the report. The report, I think, identifies all of the main challenges, also puts forward some very concrete, practical and actionable recommendations. That said, I just wanted to share a little bit more from a company, from an industry perspective, why cross-border healthcare is such a critical part of the patient and also the market access pathway for cell and gene therapies in the EU. A number of the previous speakers have already highlighted the unique nature of an ATMP, often one-time treatments or very few limited treatments in highly specialized centers. This by definition means that not every member state will have a specialist center for a cell or a gene therapy in their country. And as such, perhaps more so than any other innovative therapy, cross-border healthcare becomes a very critical pathway for patients in order to access gene therapy. The report sets out the two legal pathways. I think one of the big challenges with the cross-border healthcare directive is very much that it requires an upfront payment by the patient of the treatment he or she will receive abroad, which I think we all know in the case of a high cost therapy, especially in the case where there's a high upfront cost, like in a gene therapy, this is not a viable pathway. And that basically means, although there are other routes bilateral within the context of Benelux, the Nordic collaboration, that the S2 from an EU legal perspective is kind of at this point in time the most optimal pathway for patients. And at the same time, we know that its use in the case of ATMPs has been very limited, to my knowledge, only in the case of Stremvelis. A number of the solutions, I think that the report makes the solution for a kind of guidance from the European Commission on the use of the applicable cross-border healthcare pathways. I guess as Bluebird, we'd like to see this a little bit sharpened and really seek the European Commission's guidelines or guidance setting kind of acceptable and more harmonized review and approval timelines. At the moment in the S2, which is part of the Social Security regulations, we see this really varies between, I believe, 2 weeks review and approval timeline in France into well over 3 months in some of the Nordic countries, which of course has an impact then on patient access, and particularly in the case of severe genetic diseases, this time lapse may in some cases be too much. I think another recommendation that I'd like to pick up on, and also where Bluebird has agreed to make this available as an instrument, is by no means the holy grail, but at least it provides an additional tool and instruments to payers when assessing an S2 approval application, is that of a joint HTA assessment. I think in the case of very rare genetic diseases, the burden in terms of full pricing and reimbursement submission is very much on the manufacturer, whereas in the case of very limited setup of qualified treatments with very few patients, especially in the case of ultra-rare genetic diseases, this is not a viable kind of proposition. So any kind of collaboration at an EU level to seek greater uptake, also by companies, but also by member states, of joint assessments as an additional instrument and tool when reviewing an S2 application form, is something that we very much welcome as a company, and also something that we have agreed to in the context of EU NETA. I think perhaps lastly, I mean, there's a lot of emphasis in the report on collaboration, more coordination. I think especially in the case for cross-border healthcare, where some people may have heard about the cross-border healthcare directive, but generally across the board, doctors, patient groups, patients, carers, companies, are not really familiar with the S2 pathway. Greater collaboration, but also exchange of experience is very much beneficial. And I think in today's context, where the Commission has just come out with its proposal for European Health Union, we hope that that collaboration is not only limited to cross-border health threats, but is also kind of expanded in the near future, perhaps through the evaluation of the cross-border healthcare directive, to cross-country collaboration to the benefit of patients. So I'll leave it.
Thank you, Tresha. Thank you, Tresha. Yes, indeed. And again, the fact that we will have a pharmaceutical strategy, which we know something, but we don't know everything, will be published tomorrow, hopefully. An opportune reflection on the role of the cross-border healthcare provisions, not just the directive, is definitely necessary. Before we hear the views on from the more institutional, let's say this way, representative here, I would like to ask Dabo to put out a poll on the screen to ask you all guys, from the 7 solutions proposed and presented by Adam and Carolina, which one do you consider the most important? Whilst you are thinking about it and responding to them, Here you go. We unfortunately we have been told that Xavier Kurz is unfortunately not able to join us, which this at the same time a fortunate and unfortunate news in the terms that is unfortunate because we would obviously would have liked to hear from the EMA, but it's fortunate because we are running a bit out of time. So I will go without further ado to Marcus Guardian from UNIT HTA. Marcus, welcome with us. You've just been calling into question by not one but two of the previous speakers. So what do you think is the role of UNHCA and the potential future joint collaboration, and how do you see the recommendation posted here?
First of all, thank you for inviting me here today, and I think congratulations are in order for an amazing paper and findings that have been published. So congrats to all the participants and hard work that has gone into this. Thank you for giving me a little bit of room, and I'll just take the time that Xavier has left me. So I'll make use of that. A lot of what has been said earlier today, and I think sort of resonates with me personally, but I think also a little bit in the discussions that we see in the HTA community when it comes to, and this is more structural comment, when we think about the joint production of HTA reports, I think this is something that specifically in the realm of ATMPs is something that should be considered much, much more. And we are absolutely delighted to have on a European level our first product together with Bluebird Bio. We are having our first test, so to speak, with this product, and for us it is a challenge as well. And I think I want to take that sort of as a starting point, because when we talk about access, affordability, and all these four important buckets you sort of have created, I think it is important to keep in mind what the role of HTA is. So the role of the regulators is very clear, and they do an amazing job. And I think the colleagues at the EMA have created a system that provides very good avenues for fast access for such important products as discussed here today. At the same time, the role of HTA is a different one, and it is very challenging because for the role in which most HTA agencies or departments and ministries find themselves, they have to give advice on the efficiency of a product compared to others, or in whatever shape or form. And of course, not only price is relevant, but what has been discussed earlier today several times is the uncertainty level of evidence that comes along with these products. And it is not so much that we doubt the sincerity of the data or the quality of the data. It is just, it comes with uncertainties that are very difficult for decision makers to accept or to put into context. So I think it will remain a big struggle for HTA communities in that role. And I think it is of utmost importance that specifically for products such as ATMPs, we as early as possible start to collaborate together. That means producers, patients, regulatory, and HTA. UNETA and the EMA have created already a system where we do together scientific advice, which I think is a very important step in the right direction. And ideally, what we would like to see is an entire life cycle of this. So we start together with the producers, the regulatory and HTA, and everyone else involved with early dialogues, with the scientific advice already in mind, post-launch evidence generation. So what will we do after launch of product? How can we gather data? How can we set up databases, how registries that are relevant not only for one country or one HTA agency, but further beyond that. So UNETA has made great strides in creating the request tool, which is a guidance tool for new registries to be set up. I think that has been used already quite a bit, and we're very proud of it, and it's now been tested further. But it really allows for new registries to get a better understanding of what data HTA agencies need. And I think this is something that we would like to see included in very early product cycles. And for us, that is, I think, one of the elements that we see partially in your paper, and I think that that has been requested earlier today as well, that a joint effort needs to be taken. And I think the HTA community is absolutely in agreement with that. At the same time, the individual roles need to be taken into consideration as well. And HTA has a very different role from the regulatory side, and the needs in terms of to function and to be able to fulfill the function of HTA need to be met in the data as well. And that is something that can only be done if we start early together, and also if we have the same definitions we work with when it comes to qualification of evidence, and all of these elements. I think that is something we really should look forward to. When it comes to the question of guidance on ATMPs, I think that is something that will be fantastic. And I think both or all participants would definitely profit from a more aligned guidance in terms of ATMPs in general from regulatory and HTA. How realistic that is, I cannot say, but I think it is definitely something worthwhile going for. It is not a secret that there is currently also the HTA regulation discussed in Council and European Parliament. I think that sure should be also a focus of, if I may say so, participants in this group, specifically, if I may say so, the latest drafts that I was privy to see indicate that specifically the scope of that regulation is very limited. And even though I personally, and this is my personal opinion, participants in today's meeting might disagree, but I do believe that specifically ATMPs are a group of compounds that should be considered for joint assessments. These are not necessarily seen in scope for that regulation at an early stage. And I think that is a very big missed opportunity. That is my personal opinion. But I think here I would recommend to engage with MEPs as such in the room here today, but also others, and see what can be done. I think that would be a massively missed opportunity, and therefore, yeah, please do keep that in mind.
Thanks, Marcus. Yes, unfortunately, if I open the question or the discussion around the latest draft of compromise on the health technology assessment, we might not end up in time. We might not end up in time anyway, but I would like to bring in, and thank you very much for your comments, Marcus. I would like to bring in, now that you've called in action, Mr. Katerina Konechna. Hello, and thank you for joining us. You have listened to a few of the discussion, and particularly for the last part, obviously Mr. Guardian have introduced the question on the common approach to health technology assessments. Your views on advanced therapies, please, Ms. Konechna.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me today. And I'm really glad to be here and hear the voice of you as my experts and people from whose I learn about the new rare impact report. As you probably know, I'm a member of the ENVI committee, and I'm the coordinator of the new Beating Cancer Special Committee and the shadow of the EU for Health program, which could be so very important for you as an organization. And thank you very much for cooperation with me, with my assistants, because I think we did a great work last days and last weeks, and it will be something more for you and your organization in EU for Health. I need to say that it's because you was in our side and you help us and preparing with us some amendments and all these things. Thank you very much for this, because it was a glad to cooperate with you, and I think that in the end we could see that it was a good job of what we did in autumn of 2020 in a COVID period. So how the European Parliament can support better access to advanced therapies by the rare diseases patient? Well, this is a tricky question, but because the European Parliament does not have a legislative initiative, so we are tied to the actions of the European Commission. There are challenges, they are common across all countries in Europe. However, they largely require a country-level policy change to overcome. But unfortunately, there is no role for the EU institution in this area. It's becoming increasingly clear that EU primary law needs to be fundamentally amended in the area of cooperation of member states on public health issues. The crisis over the COVID-19 pandemic has only further highlighted this need. Until this change occurs, we in the European institution can do very little to what already exists today. Every change will be just cosmetic. However, there are still some challenges that exist and at the European level that can be still addressed. Improving patient access to advanced therapy is a long distance run. Just one step will not help. First of all, I think it's a time to change the old regulation of advanced therapy medical products. And I'm sure that I will heard, and I heard today more about this. Thank you very much, Madam. Sorry, I think I don't remember the name, but the woman from the patient organization. It was very grateful for me.
Mariette.
And Mariette, sorry Mariette, that I forget your name. And I believe that the role of patient in this committee should be strengthened, because I think we work for this, and we will do it everything what we can for this. So I tell this on every even on forum dedicated on the issue of EU public health policy for the last 3 years, and I will tell it again here. Much needs to be done to improve patient access to availability and affordability to innovative medicines. And the first needs to be final completion and adoption of the joint health technology assessment regulation, because there is currently huge differences in the implementation between the member states, and the introduction of one common EU-wide HTA process is only right way to start tackling these inequalities. And you talk about it, but believe me, it's not in our hand in the European Parliament. I worked on this document last 5 years, and we really support it. We really push the member states, but the crucial trouble is, or the basic trouble is in a member state and in a hand of a Minister of Health in a member state. I so fight with my ministry in Czech Republic, for example. I was in many working committees and so on, where we discussing it. But sometimes it's very difficult. But if we find one presidency which take this as their most important things what they can do, I think that from our side as the European Parliament, we haven't a problem to do it, and we haven't a problem to finish this work. It's not, and I'm not speaking now only from my side, but I believe that so from the side of my colleagues in with which I working on it and on this topic these 5 years. And I think that we everybody here in this building really supported, because I understand how important it is. So, but the next steps in reduction of differences in approach is to introduce joint purchases, at least of orphans and innovative medicine. Because Benelux show us how the collaboration could work on a joint purchase of Spinraza from Biogen for the treatment of spinal muscular atrophy. And the cost savings are then much higher than the availability of treatment will increase. Mass purchase of remdesivir or COVID-19 vaccine have shown us that this is possible to do at the EU level, and that so far member states only lack the will. That means that we very often now discussing with the Commissioner Kyriakides that, okay, we heard last 5 years that it's impossible, but now in a crisis, we see that is it possible. And I think that we need to take it now. Now is a time to say, okay, you show us how is it possible, and we need now using this for orphans and innovative medicines, because it's so important for our patients across the Europe and European Union, that I think, and I hope, and I'm doing anything what I can, that it will be heard in a European Commission and in the member states, because we see that it's not so big problem as we expected in the beginning. And if somebody wants something, that is possible. And I think that now, the time of COVID-19, it's only maybe one small thing what it's positive about the COVID-19, that we see that many things about we discussing years and years, last 5 years, that now are possible. And we need to use our change to change things in a European level. So, but last but not least, we shall look again to the issue of the patent law and intellectual property rights, because it's so necessary, and it's simply not possible that billions from the EU and member states budgets every year flow into the research and development of innovative medicine and therapies, and in the end of the process, their price is not affordable to the patients and the public insurance companies. Billions and billions we really invest and will invest in a new Horizon program, in a EU for Health program, for research, and I think that it's impossible that no will be existing some better treatment, cooperation between the pharmacy industry and the European Union, because it's impossible to doing these things more, because spend our money and then the patients have expensive the medicines, and it's a little bit crazy for me and shock if I see now, for example, in a COVID vaccine. Yeah, I will be end now. I think this is a 2, 3, 4 maybe things what we need to do from our side. We are preparing. Thank you once more for your help, and I hope that our cooperation will continue on all these files. And I promise you that if somebody else have some things would want to say, tell us, and would want to prepare for us, we have no problem to using and give it here in the European Parliament. Thank you very much for this, and sorry that I was so short.
No, it's all right. Thank you very much for the passion, particularly that you're putting into supporting the cause of rare diseases. And I think from the beginning of your speech, you brought into discussion some of the key regulation and public health basis that the Commission can use. And now I have Rocio Salvador Roldan, who's a veteran in the ATMP, if I may say so, in the ATMP regulation and policy. Rocio, how do you respond to some of the questions that Katerina has put forward, but also how do you see the recommendation presented in the report actionable in the future?
Yeah. So first, I want to thank you, Lourdes, for this initiative. It is a very comprehensive report. It has some useful and concrete proposals. And I think it is great that the patients are taking this initiative because we are at the Commission and also in the agency, we are trying to create conditions to support the development of ATMPs. And I think that it is fair to recognize that we have moved significantly in the last few years. Europe remains the jurisdiction that is leading in terms of authorizations granted. But it's also fair to recognize that we can do more and we should do more. And it is important that the patients remind us that there are things that we need to resolve, and we need to resolve it quickly. From your report, I think that you have pointed out on many issues that I would agree. To me, the most important actions would be to work on a framework on registries. Europe lacks a framework on registries. We don't have common rules. Every member state applies different criteria. When we grant marketing authorizations for ATMPs, despite they are centralized, we learned that in addition, member states might require national registries. Then we have the additional layer of the request of the HTA. So in the end, we have a proliferation of registries which create a lot of administrative burden for the developers, but also fatigue in the doctors that have to be filling 3 or 4 registries for the same patient. And ultimately, and in particular for the case of rare diseases where you have very few patients, it is more useful to have a robust single data set that is accessible to all, and that we can all learn from that, and to have very fragmented registries that don't talk to each other. So I hope that we can move on in having an EU framework for registries. And then another very important element is that for ATMPs, because they are very complex products, and in some cases you need to have a special qualification of the centers that administer these products. And when on top of that you put the fact that many of these products will be intended to treat only a very small number of patients across the EU, we have to work and we have to understand that we will not be having a model of treating centers in every single location across the EU, but we will probably have to have 1 or a few locations. So we need to work on making it easier for patients, wherever they are in Europe, to access these treatment centers. And I've learned about today about some of the restrictions or some of the limitations in the cross-border healthcare directive. So in my view, this is also something very important to address. Something that perhaps has not been addressed in this report is the issue of platform technologies. And I think that if that concept can be substantiated and become a reality, I think that this would be a game changer for the field and for the patients, and in particular in the cases of monogenetic rare diseases. And another point which I think it could be of relevance for the patient community is to engage into some education campaign on patients affected by these devastating diseases, and to explain where are clinical trials ongoing, where are possibilities to be treated, but also to explain the risk and dangers of treatments that are being offered outside Europe, but unfortunately also inside Europe, treatments that are unproven, that have not been run any clinical trial. And so if I can call it like fake therapies, I think that to educate patients, both to guide them to where clinical trials are ongoing and could be treated, and then secondly, alert about the dangers of fake therapies.
Definitely, Rocio. Thank you so much for your comments, and thank you to everyone that has introduced their point of view. I will ask Davor to put up the results of the polls that we have had just before. We can see the not a clear leader, but certainly the most important point that our audience finds is that the most important solution is to issue common guidance on ATMP assessment focused on methodological uncertainty, building on existing initiative to form a framework for assessment at the country level. So and then not so close second, but collaboration on registries that Rocio put forward just early on. A real world data set is there too. Now, some questions coming in, for instance, from Thomas Bowles from PTC, asking directly to Tresha and Marcus if both Bluebird and NHTA expect member states, what member states will do with the joint HTA assessment results of that therapy? If you can say, yeah, that's a bit of a delicate question, but clearly is an example of things that can come forward.
Hi, so Trisha from
Trisha.
Bluebird. I mean, we have opted for this joint clinical assessment for the very reason that we will have very limited treatment centres for our second gene therapy in the EU. That also means that we will not submit pricing reimbursement dossiers in every member state. We would also not have the capacity to do so. At the same time, and again, that's why I said this is not the holy grail, but we wanted to kind of take on board some of the concerns that payers have expressed, not just to Bluebird, but generally around cross-border healthcare, that they're expected to send patients potentially abroad through the S2 or another mechanism without having had a chance to do an assessment. So we've opted as Bluebird at least to go for a joint EU-NETA assessment to provide an additional tool on the clinical assessment side to payers for those countries where we do not have treatment centers and where we will not have country-specific pricing reimbursement submission. So that's really the rationale. It's just to provide an additional tool and instrument for countries to use in assessing if they want to send patients abroad.
Yeah, thank you, Trisha. Marcus, if I may add, as urologists, we have always supported the necessity of a joint HTA process and coordination at European level, and there is plenty of evidence of that. But you mentioned your personal view on the current state of affairs on the HTA file, and for us, pulling together evidence for the reason that Trisha has highlighted, it makes sense. Why do you think that is not well taken up by member states?
I think we have to differentiate. So to come to the question, of course, it is the intention of UNETA members to minimize duplication, and this is the entire endeavor why we set out to do this. And by minimizing duplication, we of course try to provide not only faster but also a better access. Also specifically, as just mentioned, the fact that not necessarily every country will do an assessment on ATMPs in general. So for us, this is also, I think, an opportunity to allow member states to provide at least one form of assessment to their own processes. When I talk about the regulation, I think that is a highly politicized process. So I think there's very clear differentiation between each member state, but also between a political level, which is understandable. Healthcare is one of the most politicized fields we can imagine, and it's very important for every member state to have full control over it. Therefore, any sort of mingling on a European level creates very robust feedback, let's put it that way, from national governments. These are separate from HTA bodies and HTA procedures. So I think that we have to keep separate. I think that collaboration has been proven in the last couple of years within UNETA Joint Action 3 as being efficient and possible and fruitful. Now we really need to translate that into a future EU HTA system that does it even more robustly and more predictable, meaning that all partners, all participants know what's coming their way.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I have another question that perhaps was raised by Katerina. The COVID-19 pandemic showed that the European Commission and member states, if they want to, can access and use instruments that previously were very difficult to use, such as, for example, joint procurement or joint purchasing. Now, I'm not an economist, but Adam Hutchings is. I would like to ask Adam, and if the other panelists would like to add, would joint procurement or joint purchasing work in the case of ATMPs?
I can't think of a conceptual reason why it wouldn't. I think the complexity of the procurement part of the HTA process is whether different member states have the same values and same sort of willingness to pay, the same ability to pay. And the reason why there's been resistance, I think, for sort of pan-European pricing negotiations is the sense that these things can vary tremendously between countries. So where we've seen these sort of nascent attempts to collaborate on procurement is normally amongst countries with relatively similar characteristics, GDP, social values. And I think there's no reason why ATPs would be, I think, more or less successful within those frameworks.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Joint procurement purchasing or joint negotiations? Because in the case of a gene therapy, where it's a very individualized therapy, I'm not quite sure how that would work. Joint procurement, joint negotiations, joint discussions, certainly within the context of regional collaborative initiatives, yes. Challenging, but I think possible. I just wanted to clarify that, because in the case of kind of highly individualized therapies, really tailored to the individual patient, where often it's not entirely clear who the eligible patient is, I'm not quite sure how joint procurement purchasing would work in practice, but open to ideas.
My question was primarily in in the wake of the epidemic. Perhaps Rocio can shed some light on how the European Commission has, if she knows that, obviously, and if she can, but has taken up instruments that previously were not that well used also by member states, and perhaps that could apply to ATMPs, obviously joint negotiation being another one that, as you wrote this, we have strongly advocated for. Rocio, if you have any views.
Yeah, so well, first I should have made a general disclaimer that anything that I said today represents my own view but does not commit the Commission. As usual, then for the COVID-19 purchase agreements, they have been done on the basis of voluntary agreements from the member states that decide to participate. So because we all know that the EU doesn't have the competence to deal with many aspects of health in general, but in this case of crisis, it was perceived by member states that it would be a benefit for all if we all join forces and do it together. So the same mechanisms could be put in place for rare diseases. I don't see why not, if member states would agree. It would all depend on the realization that by going together, it is better off for all of us. So I don't see in principle a fundamental obstacle, but it all depends on the member states. Of course, there are many diseases, and so to make it manageable, I assume that one would have to limit it to, of course, the products that have been authorized, and to see if member states would be in agreement for a joint purchase, but this is all a speculation. So in principle, the mechanism could be applied if member states would agree.
Thank you. Thank you, Rocio. And now, at the very beginning, there was a question related to what we're going to do with this recommendation. And perhaps I turn to Jan to see what we collectively do as a follow-up to this event to make sure that some of the recommendations are well implemented.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you. The good news, really, we heard from MEP Konietzka, but also from Mrs. Rocio Salvador-Roldan, is that many things were impossible before becomes possible after the pandemic. So there is a framing of the discussion which is clearly different. We have an immediate challenge in front of us, which is this EU legislation on HTA compromise, which, if it doesn't land where it should land in terms of joint assessment, and particularly in this area of innovative therapies like cancer or rare diseases, and particularly here in the advanced therapies, I think will completely miss the point and might take us backward for a certain time. So that's the immediate concern. But looking ahead of us and how to follow with this report, I see really very different positive aspects of it. First, the only fact that we had these 2 years of collaboration across 20 organizations, for-profit, non-for-profit, sharing very openly their experience, the bad and goods, their analysis, their knowledge, has really helped to shape a common understanding of the issues and which actionable solutions could be activated in order to improve the situation in the immediate coming years. And that's very positive because we have FPI, UCOP, and the Alliance of Regenerative Medicines involved into it. So that means that each party in their respective remits and their own channels will try to make these actionable solutions progress. The education aspect mentioned in terms of educating the public about the needs of the population, about the potential of these new treatments, potentially curative, and that is completely new, is important. The mutual education between the decision makers, both within the marketing authorization holder or developers and within the healthcare system, and I would add within also the patient groups, is important. And I really see that as a mutual education process. We need to listen much more to each other issues and perspective. And that takes me to the 3 work streams that we will continue for next year. We are finalizing discussions within the consortium to go for 1 more and last year of the Rare Impact Consortium, focusing on 3 areas of work. One, and that's probably the most obviously sensitive one, is to work on price, value determination, economic model of ATMPs in order to enable a dialogue to support patient access. And we heard 2 patient representatives today, Mariette and Hervé, insisting on the high prices and the issues to be addressed here, and that we also need to look maybe at cost constriction, and that maybe there is other models and etc. And I think we need to discuss all that clearly. And we need to listen at the same time to the marketing authorization holder and to their investors behind them to make sure that at the end we do have an economic model which is attracting investment in the development of these therapies in Europe and in the US in order to have them approved and accessible at the end. And here different routes have been mentioned. For instance, the question of potentially joint negotiations. I would agree with Tricia that joint procurement here may not be the immediate route, but the joint negotiation may be one. There may be, exactly like for COVID, an added value of doing it together rather than doing it alone. And particularly if we think that only some centers across Europe will provide the treatment. So anyhow, there will be cross-border healthcare issues. So all these elements need to be taken together, and we have a role to play collectively to promote innovative solutions here and to be bold about addressing the issues. And here, what we want is patient access quickly and in an equitable manner across Europe so that they get the treatment at the right time. But we need also the predictability. That's what we need to enhance. The predictability both for the member states, for the national healthcare system, about the cost and the reduction of uncertainties and what they are paying for progressively. So it's not only about the model of payments, it's also about the reduction of uncertainties and the value of the products and the reduction of these uncertainties, and then the enhanced value on the targeted populations. And it's also the predictability for the companies, either for profit or not for profit, who are developing these products and introducing them on the market. And here there is interest and there is possible take and give up from all parties to try to find a way. The second pieces of work we want to continue is exactly what comes first here in the poll and in the discussion, is to develop recommendations on the disease registries around ATMPs. And that takes us immediately to EMA and HTA in developing guidelines as they are started to do, as it was mentioned today, and that's fantastic. And we need to pursue that. And we need to bring on board some individual HTA agencies in addition to the EUNet HTA, so that there is an alignment here of the guidelines, and that there is more and more early on dialogue with the companies to discuss these registries and data collection, not only for the purpose of approval for marketing authorization or for the purpose of effectiveness, relative effectiveness assessment by HTA, but also to anticipate as early as possible the generation of post-marketing evidence, including through the real-world evidence, so that we can really work on these uncertainties and work on the clinical outcomes and have a right system in place. And we have not mentioned today the European Funds Network, but they come into that picture. We have the privilege of having the networks of centers of care. And that takes me to the next third aspect of work where we intend to work together is on the centers of expertise. And that was mentioned from our first speaker from the academic perspective, but also by several others, is that we need to share as openly as possible the experience of the companies on identifying the centers where the treatments will be delivered, and what kind of requirements they have, what made them decide to go for this one, and what kinds of criteria and conditions they've put into the contract in terms of technical environment, human resource environment, processes, data collection. And sharing some of these elements across is important. Trying to come to convergences in that type of contract is important. Getting this contract reviewed by CHMP or to some sort of qualification will enhance the overall quality process, but also the safety and efficacy. And if we work on that together with the criteria for the identification or certification, locally accreditation by member states of their rare disease centers of expertise, together also with the European Funds Network and the endorsement by member states. So we have these three levels, right? The ERNs and endorsement by member states, the national strategy on centers of expertise, which are not always fully aligned with the European system, and then the company gré à gré discussions with the hospitals and healthcare providers. So we need an alignment here to be consistent, to make sure that at the end, every center which delivers a gene or cell therapy is part of this national accreditation system and affiliated to European Funds Network, and the other way around. And that there is then an easy identification and formalization of a network, whatever that network is, as mentioned at the beginning by our academic representative. So we certainly need that identification. We certainly need a certain level of networking. And that goes together with the data collection, because all the data collection is going to be through these centers. And as it was mentioned by Mariette, we need here strategic partnership, which has to be disease partnership and has to be between the different parties of the healthcare system, the marketing holder, and the patients' organizations. So these are the three areas of work where we hope to progress in the coming year to try to translate some of the recommendations of that report into more concrete, even more concrete elements to translate into, at the end, an improvement in terms of access for patients. And I don't think we can much afford to lose, because until now, we cannot say that it has been a success, this patient access to gene and cell therapy. So if we really want to grasp on all these fantastic scientific advances, this improvement in the regulatory process with the PRIME, with the conditional market authorization, with all of that, there is a lot of positive around that. The European Funds Network, the collaboration in HTA. So let's take advantage of these specific assets of Europe to make Europe a very attractive place for gene and cell therapy development, but also for an equitable access for patients. We have a model to defend here of Europe to have access to this innovative treatment. Most of them are going to be potentially curative. That's a major change, and that's why we're also engaging in early discussion with WHO, because WHO now is also looking at these therapies because they are curative. So it's a change of paradigm. We need to look also at volume in Europe and worldwide. There is another way to look at it than just contemplating the problems and accepting to be killed by the system when innovation is at hand.
Thank you, Jan. That's
and I'd like with that to thank all the colleagues involved in this work. Really, I'd like to thank the colleagues from Dolan, Adam Hutchins, Darren Callanan, and Caroline Moore-Larsen. I'd like to thank my colleague Carolina Hanslick and Simone Boselli for taking it forward, and all the colleagues who were involved in the consortium. I'd like to thank you. Really, many of you have given a lot of time, a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, and that's highly appreciated. Really, that's as much value as the money you brought forward in the consortium. Really, and I'd like to thank our speakers today also for your contribution and for speaking personally sometime. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Well, and with this, with the final word from Jan in conclusion, I would like to thank everyone for listening today for the 2 hours. I hope everyone enjoyed and took home new messages from this 2 years initiative. As you heard both from Jan and Adam, the work is not finished, but we are in a new phase, and we hope that this will be concrete and will improve access to these innovative therapies. Thank you to everyone for participating. Have a great rest of the afternoon and a fantastic week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.